There are 168 hours in a week. We go to church for 1 hour. What about the other 167?
Cue this podcast. We're here to bring the church to you the rest of the week. I'm David Vogel, the Director of Communication here at Central Community Church.
I'm Corey Brodel, the Director of Community. We've been to the 1 hour in church. Now welcome to the other 167.
We are back with the second part of this two-part episode where we have our senior pastor, Bob Beckler, here answering some of the questions that came out of our recent series about Genesis. And so if you did not listen last week, if you didn't listen to last week's episode, go back and listen because we talked about some really cool things from why Satan got thrown out of heaven to dinosaurs and to why we usually depict the forbidden
apple.
fruit as an apple. But that one kind of blew my mind. So we're back. We've got a few more questions, and I'm really looking forward to where these go. Yeah,
I've already learned so much in part one, so looking forward to this. So we're going to dive right in. First question, why didn't God accept Cain's sacrifice?
Ooh, good question. That's a very good question. You know, one of the things that we talked about last time is that there are some things that the Bible is very specific on, and there are other things that they aren't quite as specific. And so the whole thing with Cain and Abel, I think, goes back to the early days, learning under Adam and Eve. We know that in the beginning, when God gave his instructions to Adam, Eve was not present. That was part of the reason why the fall took place, or the temptation, because Satan was wanted to know how much of the scriptures that Eve knew. He understood that she had a general idea but wasn't specific, and so all he had to do was twist a few words. And so it's important that we know what the scriptures say. During that time, if you remember that when Adam and Eve sinned, that God did something, and a lot of the things that God did, everything he did was for a reason, but a lot of things he did was very symbolic. And you remember that when God, he came and was walking through the garden, he's looking for Adam and Eve. Where are you? You know what I mean? Can you imagine those words when you're hiding?
That would be terrifying.
I remember when my dad would come and say, Bob, where are you? And I'd go, oh, dear Lord, please don't let him see me. Anyway, but and so after there was that conversation when God pronounced the curse and the results of sin and all of that, God did something that demonstrated that the plan of redemption was going to take place. And he did it when he killed an animal. And in that animal was an innocent animal, and it had to sacrifice its life. Why? To cover Adam and Eve from those parts that were exposed that brought about shame. That act right there for Adam and Eve taught them a lot. And just as we try and cover things up with sin, we can never totally cover them up. And so the only way that total cover-up or that sin is to be removed is for a total covering. And that's where Jesus comes in. We put on Christ. We put on that garment of righteousness, and it covers us. So God doesn't see our sin. He sees Christ in us. And so talking about all of that, going back to Adam and Eve, Adam had to have taught his children that there is a wrong way to approach God and a right way to approach God. And man, that'll preach right there, won't it? But it's about the way we worship God. And so we know that one was a shepherd and one was a farmer. And people ask, so why was one a shepherd and why was one a farmer? Because those were the needs that they had in those days. Clothing and food. That was pretty much it. And so one became one and one became the other. It is the belief of theologians that when that animal was sacrificed, and we believe it could have been a lamb, okay? But when that animal was sacrificed, that sacrifice made, that blood sacrifice of that innocent animal that gave his life was a clear symbolic picture to Adam and Eve to share with his boys that the way that you approach God is through a sacrifice. A sacrifice of a blood sacrifice. And that's why the Bible also talks about that, we can't eat the blood because the blood is the life of whatever the organism is. And so because of that, there is a belief that when Abel brought his sacrifice, he would have brought a blood sacrifice. But we don't know exactly what it was that Cain didn't understand, but we do know that there was a right way and a wrong way, because God said, he so told Cain, goes, now don't you know, remember, if you do this right, you will be accepted. But he didn't. And so, that not approaching God in the right way was what got Cain in trouble.
Yeah. Okay, so keeping with Cain, the next question is, who was Cain's wife? And I might...
Her name was her name was Ethel. Did you know? No. I'm just kidding. No.
But I'm assuming that question comes from, where do the other people come from if God created Adam and Eve in the garden?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I never even thought about that question when I was growing up. But the Bible tells us, I believe it's in Genesis 4, verse 17, it talks about Cain's wife. We're never given her name. And so here's one of the things that we do know. We do know that from a process of elimination, you remember that Abraham, he married his half-sister, okay? And we know that Isaac also married a blood relative, remember, the daughter of Laban, okay? Yep. And so what we do understand is that God did not bring about that they could not marry or intermarry in family members until the Mosaic covenant. And so that was some 2,500 years later.
Okay.
So until that time, there's only one other group of people that would be left on the earth, and that was your family. And so when Cain and Abel, at that time, Seth was born, I think, when they were 130 years old. There are some different very wise men who have gone through and they've thought, okay, about that time when the whole thing with Cain and Abel happened, that there could have been as many as 15,000 people living on the earth at that time. And I think we forget about that the time span that Genesis covers. It's huge. It's very long. And so that Cain's wife would have been one of his sisters.
Okay. I did not consider that possibility.
Okay, we'll go right into, we'll go to Noah and the flood. By the way, I like your shirt, David. You got the Faith Like
Noah shirt on from the series.
Very good for Genesis. I like that. Okay, what evidence is there for the worldwide flood?
Wow. I think that geology was never one of my favorite subjects to study.
You're looking at rocks.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I mean, a rock's a rock. We used to throw them at people. No, I'm just kidding. The fact that there was the pre-flood and then there was the post-flood, and the things that were interesting about the pre-flood were things like they didn't have rain. There was crazy. A mist. The water would come up from the earth. And now God says, okay, now when sin enters the world, now there's going to be storms, and we know from that comes hurricanes and all that kind of stuff. And so I always wonder what it would have been like for Noah and his family all of a sudden to hear the first pitter-patter of rain. You know what I mean? I mean, you're in this huge boat, and all of a sudden you hear something. Is somebody knocking, that type of thing? There probably were people knocking at that time. But anyway, so as they then, the flood comes, and the Bible tells us that the flood covered the entire earth. And it went higher than the highest mountain. So I don't know about you, but I've had water in my basement before. And it's amazing how much damage that can do. And then when you think about the pressure of the water and then moving water, we've seen how rivers and how they erode soil and create different tributaries and things like that. It's pretty amazing. And so, but when you go into and you look over the earth and you see, for example, like in the United States, it would be the Grand Canyon, and you look at sea and see how the rock formations, and then you can see the layers there. It's pretty obvious that there was some huge catastrophe that came about that destroyed everything. And when that water went down, everything was different. It's interesting that when you go to the Holy Lands, and this is the way the people did it, is that when they were finished with a town, they didn't destroy it. They just covered it up with dirt and built on top of it. What's really interesting about that is they didn't realize this, but they were creating a way to encase everything and keep it so that when whoever would go in and dig, and we're still finding out, we believe that probably that if you go down, when you go to the temple where Jesus in Jerusalem, if you go there and you go down 30 feet, that's where you start finding the time when Jesus was living. And so we were there, and we'd be looking down into some of these places that they'd be excavating. And I mean, they've got these fine toothbrushes and just making sure that everything is in place. And so, and then you look at now, here's this water, and it just destroys everything, and it rearranges things. And sometimes, there's all of this water, and a land will appear where it didn't before, and there are other places that are completely underwater. And so, you can go pretty much anywhere, and you can see results and fossils and things like that. And then you get into the scientific thing about how you measure the age of them. But anybody will agree, every scientist agrees, there is something that happened on the earth that created a huge change.
Wow. Little evidence left behind. That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, and that brings us to our last question that we're going to ask, and I think this is my favorite, so we saved it for the end. Did Adam have a belly button?
Wow, I don't know.
Well, you're supposed to.
I know it. I'm supposed to know that. I don't. When I first got that question, I just had to laugh, and then I just had to think, boy, some people have too much time on their hands to think about, some of these questions. And then I wondered, that sounds like a question that maybe a 10 or 11-year-old would ask.
That's
or
why
something,
I asked it.
Maybe it was. Maybe it would be. I don't know. That's something that we're going to have to ask. Lord, we know that the belly button is there from the umbilical cord,
right.
And obviously Adam and Eve were created by God, and they didn't have to pass through any, womb or live in a womb or anything like that. And so that's one of those questions that we'll just have to wait till we get to heaven and find out.
It's to be continued, then.
There you go.
I thought you were going to ask the next question, be, okay, was it an innie or an outie?
Well,
no,
that was a follow-up, but you didn't know.
Yeah, that's right. That kind of blows that. Yeah. So, anyways.
Well, thank you so much, Pastor Bob.
You
this
bet.
Has been a lot of fun just to dig back into this stuff and go a little deeper.
Yeah.
Yep. Stop by anytime.
Yeah, I will. But last thing I would just say is I really encourage, people who, dig into the Bible. Just read the Bible. There's so many commentaries on things, and I don't care what question you have with what we have on our internet and things like that. You can punch in something and I encourage you to dig deeper, because it's amazing to find out the things that God reveals to us. So,
absolutely.
I love it.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to 167. Please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you're listening from.
And to keep up with everything at Central Community Church, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want to watch us record this podcast live, find us on YouTube.
We think the 167 hours between church services are so important, and we hope you'll share this episode with your friends. Join us next week.